certain issues that's actually surfacing and how it involves us. And then there are some of them we like to cover and there are some we don't. And Luigi Mangione case is one of them that we really don't like to cover. However, because of the hysteria around this issue, we have to kind of follow up with what we have. So I have some personal um, observations regarding this issue. And, you know, one of the things, and I thought I mentioned this last week, apparently I didn't. So one of the things for me was after watching Menendez brothers, for those who don't know, they are a very wealthy family, two kids, they killed their parents. So there's a new TV show on Netflix. So, and I did watch it, I believe, maybe 2 months ago. And the way they portrayed these individuals, there was a point where I felt like, oh, maybe they should free them. So the issue again is how media even can influence a 50-year-old like someone like me, someone who has a lot of education, a lot of experience. Even I can feel like, oh, well, maybe they shouldn't be in jail anymore. But then there was that part where the older brother or the older brother, where he was actually telling everything to this outsider, where she was writing and recording all those. So I think if that piece didn't happen, I don't know if you guys watched this, but if that piece wasn't there, I would almost say that, hey, these guys shouldn't be in jail anymore. So this is how dangerous the way that media influence is. So, and I see a similar pattern in this issue. Psychological impact on a 14, 15, 16-year-old or a 26-year-old. This is something that we see as a problem with these individuals. So therefore, responsibility of media needs to be taken very seriously. And I believe that is what's lacking in this whole issue so far. Now, when we look at this issue from another $1 billion family, and it's not a joke, it's like they're extremely wealthy. And they have this 26-year-old who is missing since apparently June timeframe, 2024. And the way that it is, what's happening with the family? Where is the family? Where is this really extremely wealthy family where they let this guy who has great education from UPenn, but he lives in a hostel. Like this is a group of people live together. It's not a hotel. It's not even like a hotel room. So you share rooms in these settings. So, well, my family is not $1 billion family, but I don't remember last time I flew economy. So why is this guy living in this poverty is not making sense? That means there's a bigger story of this. There is a bigger issue of family and his ties with his family. And there's something that's, or perhaps he actually chose to do this. We don't know. But definitely he wasn't happy. So what made him to decide to disappear and disconnect with his family? So this is something interesting. The media is not actually covering this. Why is media not telling and researching and doing the journalism that's needed and then go and find these facts? And then instead of providing us what he wears, and is it like maroon or burgundy, like making that color discussion of his sweater versus like his orange shoes, but not talking about what happened to this person with his family. Why does he live with a group of people? That's not a desirable situation for someone who comes from this level of wealth, this level of education. So I think that's going to probably change a lot of things. And I think maybe because of that desperation, he got closer to this other guy, Brian Thompson, and maybe there was some type of a relationship between the two. Now, of course, I don't know any of these. I'm just guessing because the pieces that we have today is not making any sense. So now, when I am watching these supporters of Luigi Mangione, this is another thing that really bothers me. So in this country, you may be happy or unhappy with anything or everything, but there's a way to process and go after these things legally. So you don't have to commit crime. If everyone is trying to get their way by harming other people, then it will be like the old days. It would be a crazy country to live in, and that's not what we are. We are one of the best democracies and best systems in the world, and because of that, you have choices. You can, especially someone who's this intelligent, could have chosen a better pattern, better. He could make better decisions and do a better job. But today, what we are seeing is a group of people who are supporting him outside of the court. This person, because of him, there are two kids right now. They went through Christmas without their father. Forget the wife because they were not together. But the two kids, they were close enough to him that he bought a house in the same neighborhood. So the two kids don't have their fathers anymore because Luigi has his moments. Now let's go to our BRICS and dollars dominance, whether or not dollars dominance is under threat. Let's talk about what's happening with the Trump de-dollarization and then what U.S. needs to do. So this is, I mentioned last week or the week before, I feel like I own the topic of BRICS in the United States, because when I start talking about this, no one was aware of what was happening. I'm not saying that they didn't know, but they didn't think this was going to happen. So why this is important is because I believe that the changes that's going to happen in the near future is going to impact the average American's life. So, but the issue is what I see between the two administration of Biden versus Trump, one being extremely passive versus the other one is becoming extremely aggressive, and see where this is going to take us. And for people to understand, for those who may not have any idea before what BRICS is, they can at least see what's coming to their way. So the issue, I believe, from United States standpoint, I believe we need to prepare what's coming from the administration standpoint. But this doesn't mean that we need to be extremely aggressive. So I want people to kind of remember, for those who are following the global issues, the reason probably BRICS got a lot of momentum is because the way that us, United States, use the dollar as the financial sanctions and the weaponization of dollar, so where we said, okay, you are not going to do X for me, so I'm going to take you out of this financial system. We did this to a lot of countries, and this was out of proportion. So the financial sanctions and the weaponization of dollar was the reason this actually BRIC got a lot of this issue. Now Trump says, hey, I'm going to go with 100% tariffs on BRICS plus countries. Well, this sounds good. The average American may say, hey, go and get it done, blah, blah. But is it the best thing for us? Probably not. Is it realistic? Absolutely not. Is it doable? Yes, but then who's going to pay for it is us people who live in the United States. So the when you look at the the BRICS plus countries, uh, they represent 35%, actually close to 40% of the global's GDPs. And this is a lot more than, this is what we have to kind of deal with. So we have to kind of pick our battles carefully. So being aggressive, sometimes anger is sweet, but it's not the best thing for us. So we have to be smart. And we have to deal with these other countries in a more constructive way. So just because we don't get our way doesn't mean that we need to destroy them, because there are people who live in those countries. Like this can be Philippines, this can be Turkey, this can be any other country in the world who are depending on dollar and global currency. So therefore, we have to be more responsible. So what may happen? So can we see, you know, BRIC plus countries pushing for de-dollarization? Yes, that will probably happen in time. But would it, if things get more aggressive, if US goes out of its way and make a lot of enemies, this can motivate those countries to take this to a next level. The next level would be the would be another currency, because right now they're just trying to have another financial system like SWIFT. So they just want to have an alternative. So then if you need to do the trade with different countries, you are not depending on your good relationships with the United States. That's what the issue is. And all these countries, they have a great trade level with us, and we also need them. So we need to buy those things from somewhere. If you don't produce them, what's going to happen if you don't have those available to us? So things are going to become more and more expensive for us. So we mentioned the sanctions and how it's being used. And clearly, in my opinion, Trump probably needs to loosen up a little bit, making things less aggressive, and have build good relationships with these countries, and not to use dollar as a weapon. So then we can actually like, if I tell you some unrealistic, if I promise you some unrealistic project that's not going to happen, and you just go crazy about it, well, 12 months later, I'm going to ask you what happened, and you have zero progress, or you have 2% or 5%, we are going to say, hey, things didn't work out. So this is not what we discussed, right? So this is what's going to happen. I think he's probably misguided in a way, at least in my opinion. So the future is we are going to see probably dollar weakening, and therefore things are going to be a little bit more difficult for us in the United States. So what does that mean is this is going to be higher interest rates, inflation, everything is going to be probably less accessible or available, and that's going to impact the average American. So that's one of the reasons that we are bringing this up.
And now just switching gears a little bit here, obviously, as we mentioned on Monday, you were participating on that Turkish television station to cover the inauguration. So President Trump being sworn in. We're going to shift a little bit here. We have some other questions that we'll get your perspective on, but just before we dive into those specific questions and other items, we just get your overall thoughts just on the inauguration itself.
Well, not that specific day, but overall approach is important. So, you know, this is the kind of like the honeymoon of the new administration. So everything is going to look so great for a couple of weeks, but in reality, it's going to hit. So we have covered this in the last several months. One of the things that I've been saying is that, hey, you really need to take some of the opportunities and then advance from where we are. So Trump right now, President Trump has a huge opportunity to learn from his first term. And then what has happened in the Biden's term, now what opportunities we have instead of being populist for the group that's just supporting him. What's the right thing and reasonable thing for the country to do? Not going with the emotions, but going with again. I unlike many people, I believe that Trump is not um, the term that I'm trying to I'm blanking is um, it will come to me, but he makes his decisions, he processes decisions, so he's not impulsive. So okay, so he actually knows what he wants. One of the things that I was happy with what he did. We didn't actually have any war in the world during the first Trump administration. Now, this doesn't mean that we cannot be strong, but we were able to avoid so many. Now, as soon as he's coming in, I can see certain things that he's doing already, including what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And we can already see the impact of what he's doing. Now, uh, knowing that there will be less conflict around the world is a good thing. The only thing that I'm concerned is I don't know if we are going to be able to get Greenland. That's going to be a tough one. But should we get it, I would rather be in Greenland than being in Afghanistan. So I would rather have parts. I would rather be in Greenland than participating in a war in Ukraine, because then you can actually say this is important because it's right here, but it's not. I'm not saying that I agree or disagree, but it would make more sense to do to have a better control in Greenland. The other thing is what Denmark has done in Greenland is also needs to be um, uh, there has to be a good PR, because what Denmark has done um, with the young people, young girls, and affecting the population of this little or big island. And without those people's consent, they were putting IUDs for the fertility so that people wouldn't get pregnant. So, and then this was against those people's will. And now, if you look at the population of Greenland, it didn't grow. It's because it was interfered by the Denmark kingdom. So I don't know why Denmark is a kingdom. So it's such a little country anyway. But why would they be over Greenland when it's right here? So when they are not able to provide the security and safety, because if they did, then Russia and China wouldn't be there. That's that simple. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, would we be able to get it without a war? I think, you know what, since we have these for the future, I think we can, because Denmark is part of the NATO, and NATO is fully almost financed by US. And if Denmark is not going to follow that, it's going to have a lot of issues. The other problem that I see related to the inauguration, where I see certain action coming from Trump's administration, is the Panama Canal, which I think we have full it's in our full rights to demand transparency, and if China really is taking over the control of that canal, then that cannot happen. So, and those make sense. Now, having said this, I also want to use this, and I believe I mentioned this in our in the Monday program with the Turkish TV. Now, this also would probably help American politics to understand and have some empathy to what's happening in Turkey with Turkey's southern borders. So this is a immediate security issue, safety issue, and then I think it's in our rights to defend that and then take the right actions. My Democrat friends are not going to be happy what they are hearing right now, but it's okay. They will get over it.
All right. Another thing we're going to cover here a little bit is some of the executive orders, obviously, that came out in that first couple days, the new presidency. One of the main things that was obviously drawing a lot of attention in the news was the fact of the United States leaving the World Health Organization, which we're actually going to merge this topic into one of our questions here. So obviously your initial reaction to the US leaving the WHO, and then in your response, if you could include, in your opinion, maybe which country has the best healthcare system and why does it work so well for that country? Because we know healthcare obviously was a big part of this election, and there are definitely going to be
So the
some
World
changes.
Health Organization is important because it has a good network and it has a good structure. Whether it's run efficiently or not, that can be discussed. But us not participating is a mistake. Now, I try from personal point of me, I try to be very objective. So if it's the Democrats or the Republicans, I really try to keep my independent view on these issues. And if people are able to kind of see what I have said in the past, they can actually see a lot of examples of this. Now, when I say certain things about in support for Trump, I also said with his cabinet picks, where he had some issues, and then immediately Matt Gaetz was a problem, and I knew that. A lot of people knew that, but he didn't want to see it. Problem. So that means Trump can make mistakes, obviously. So then I don't know if we have the picture of Elon and Vivek being part of this, Dodge together, like co-chairing that. And I said, which I think one of the shorts that we have this week is posted, it won't work because two powerhouses trying to do this government position, they have zero experience, and yet they're both running. How? Who's in charge? So they're not going to actually, let one take over. So, for example, when I'm in the settings with Dr. Erkan, when it's a clinical setting, I know where to stop because we both have management responsibilities, but my responsibilities in the business and his responsibilities in the clinical. But with Elon and Vivek, what's their, what that border is, not clear. And then it wasn't going to work out. And I said that in, I think either November or maybe December. And just this week, it came out that Vivek is no longer part of that. So meaning that this decision on withdrawing from WHO is wrong, because when we are in almost 78 different countries with military bases, not utilizing the World Health Organization is a huge problem. So I think time will show, but I think that's a wrong decision.
Okay. And as I was
Now,
mentioning,
you were asking if who has the best healthcare. That's not an easy answer. So people want to hear, oh, this is what it is, and that's what it is. That's not true, because depending on what we demand, right, from the healthcare. So, for example, I mentioned this so many times, probably in so many different sessions. When you're in England, getting some MRI is probably not going to happen unless it's an emergency. 9 to 12 months waiting period. Okay. For a simple MRI, I say simple, but for them it's not simple. So, what Americans wants to wait for 9 to 12 months for some elective MRI? If we have an answer to that question, and if the answer is yes, I'm going to wait for 12 months, then I will tell you that some of the European countries probably have the best system, but that's not for us. That's not for our culture here. So, and also, let's say it's Norway, right? What's the tax rate in Norway? Almost over 50% tax that they're paying. So there's no best, but there's a better fit. What's a better fit is our better version of what we have today, because we are different than European countries. We are different than Asian countries. So with the society that we live in, what society is demanding and what's reasonable, there are certain updates needs to be made. But I think the United States has the best system in the world. Now, keep in mind that I have a recent health emergency with my mom in Turkey, and then I have seen it where I actually wanted to cover that, but I have some limitations that I cannot say a lot of things. Like amazing buildings, amazing equipments, they're all up to date. Service is not same. So if I was running any of my offices here the way that it's been run in over there, we would be shut down in 1 week. So can I say that that's the best? No, but is it accessible to a lot of people? Yes, but ours is also accessible to a lot of people. So I think the better version of what we have is what we need to work on. I think Trump may be able to take some efficiency measures to make this better, and we'll see in the next 4 years.
Following up on that, another healthcare related item we have here, which actually was probably discussed a little bit in that session with Dr. David Feinberg, but was the involvement of AI now in healthcare. So we know that's obviously a growing field, exponentially seeing growth, various companies trying to utilize AI to the best of their ability, but also at that same time doing so in the right, approach. So where do you see that line being drawn for AI in its role to healthcare related?
So AI is a tool. So I use this term in our Bariatric Friday events. Bariatric surgery is the most powerful tool for fighting morbid obesity, right? So this is important because how the tool needs to be used and where it needs to be used is important. So we don't say that bariatric surgery is the most efficient tool for anyone. It's only for morbid obesity. So now AI, as long as we have a well-defined scope of how it needs to be used in terms of getting diagnostics, getting the analysis, like for example, like ChatGPT, right? So like it's not the same anymore. I don't want to Google anything anymore because that's dumb, because there's ChatGPT, and I pay a little bit more for more access and better access, and I'm able to prep for this event today in let's say maybe 6-7 times faster than when I was doing this searches on Google. And then before Google, with paper stuff, we were doing that in days. So AI is going to make us more efficient for sure, and it needs to be utilized in the data and diagnostic and those types of scope. When it comes to emotional empathy or the judgment, then that's where we draw the line. So it happens sometimes when I do certain things with ChatGPT working on a project, and I see that I can tell that this is not written by me. It's because it's cookie cutter almost, like there's so you need to actually put personalized part of what you know. So you cannot use these tools unless you are really knowledgeable in the area. So because it can just tell you whatever it wants to tell you, but how you are going to run that also is important in healthcare. So unless it's utilized by the experts, so it's not going to be helpful. But I know it's going to take us to a different level. So and definitely needs to be used. So there's no doubt there.